From the Soapbox is the official podcast for the American Animal Hospital Association's digital newsroom, Trends. Here, we take inspiration from the familiar soap notes, but instead of looking at the condition of a patient, we're diagnosing and discussing the state of the veterinary industry. We'll chat about the challenges, trends, and innovations shaping the veterinary world with voices from across the community. I'm your host, Dr. Emily Singler. Thanks for listening. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of From the Soapbox. My guest today is Ron Sosa. After falling into veterinary medicine, as he puts it, 23 years ago, he has worked in multiple roles, including CSR, practice manager, and even co-owner of multiple veterinary practices. He is now the executive director of the Uncharted Veterinary Conference, and he has his own neurodivergent leadership coaching business. His experiences as an individual with ADHD and autism have inspired him to become a pioneer of neuroinclusive leadership, or leadership styles that accommodate the unique ways in which different people's brains work. We talked in this episode about his advocacy work to improve psychological safety for veterinary team members so that more of them will see vet med as a sustainable and fulfilling career option long term. In our conversation, he also called out the systems that lead us to praise high performers while at times ignoring their suffering, and he pushed back on the idea of labeling team members as toxic. Instead, he gives us a new framework in which to look at the needs of the individual and how we can help them be more successful and productive. Without further ado, getting his time to talk from the soapbox, Ron Sosa. All right, Ron Sosa, thanks so much for joining me here on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, I'm really excited because I've seen several of your pieces out in the world that we're going to talk about today, and I just as soon as I read them, I was like, I would just love to talk to him. So I'm so glad that you're going to be here and kind of share your insight, your experiences, and kind of help us all. Just kind of, I don't know, maybe reframe some things or maybe think a little bit differently about some things. So I think it's going to be really exciting. And you are like doing so many amazing things in and around the vet med space. When we kind of spoke initially to sort of kind of plan things, I was so amazed and impressed by all the things that you're doing. Can you just kind of start us off by like sharing more about who you are and sort of your vet med story with everyone who's listening?
Absolutely. This will mark my 23rd year in veterinary medicine. I started off as a CSR. I answered an ad, and I like to say that I fell into veterinary medicine. So I answered an ad for customer service, and I wound up at the front desk, and then worked my way through as a veterinary assistant into practice management because that's what you do when you're good at your job, and then went into management. And eventually co-owned a veterinary practice as a minority share practice owner. We had 3 veterinary practices, a pet resort, and 2 retail stores. Sold that right after the pandemic in 2021. And then I've gone into L&D, and I've gone into the executive director of the Uncharted Veterinary Conference. And now I'm working in my own business as well, doing neurodivergent leadership coaching. So helping those with ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, be able to find and work the way that works with their brain and not against it, and then lead a more inclusive environment in veterinary medicine.
That's awesome. So it sounds like you're working with both sort of the individual who wants support and also with sort of the leadership, sort of the system level to kind of support those individuals.
Yeah, I don't think you can tackle one without the other because, if you don't create the entire system, you just leave it bookend open, so.
I completely agree. I think that's so important. And that is it specific to veterinary medicine that you're
It has
doing
been
all?
mostly specific to veterinary medicine. I tend to attract, I think, medical leaders, but 95% of the people I work with are from veterinary medicine. And I think that's just telling because that's where I came from and that's what I, speak to the most, and that's the audience I have. And so that's why, and I love veterinary medicine. Like, how can you
Yeah.
not?
I don't
It's a
know.
way I get to stay in.
Yeah, for sure. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, and so recently, just kind of on that topic, you wrote an article that you published on LinkedIn and it got a lot of attention and it was called "The People Are Not Okay." what veterinary medicine still refuses to acknowledge. Um, and you shared with me when we chatted earlier that you've gotten a lot of feedback from it. Um, can you share maybe like a few like high level points from that and sort of what what some of the feedback that you've gotten about it has been?
Yeah, I think the feedback I've gotten is, we talk about burnout, we talk about um uh kind of the people, the reason the people are suffering, but what we don't kind of acknowledge is the sustainability of the systems within our veterinary practices. So we're still in working within inherited systems, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? We've inherited these systems down over decades on this is how they have been, this is how veterinary medicine is operated for years and years and years. But what we're coming to is we we can no longer fit those systems. We need to really reflect on those systems and figure out who do they serve and why do they serve them, right? So a lot what I talk about is sometimes what we do is unintentionally we praise the high achiever, but we never ask the high achiever, are they actually okay? Are they the ones burning out? Because well, they're doing such a great job and they're handling it, but the system is just, burning and churning our people, and that's why I say we have a sustainability problem and not a people problem. This is not the talent pool is there, but we are driving them away through our systems, and I don't think it's intentional. I just think we do need to look at the systems we've created in practice and, look at what we value and actually implement those values in order to sustain our people in practice.
Yeah, so it seems like when we're sort of rewarding these high achievers who may be achieving what they're achieving at very severe harm to themselves, we're almost sort of continuing that I don't know if you call it not abuse, but just that very harmful um, pattern of behavior. We're almost sort of teaching them that that's what we want from them. That's what we expect from them, and
Yeah,
um,
and I've seen it in practice where our high achievers will start to dip down in productivity levels or efficiency, and they dip down to what I would say, like, the rest of the team. It's like, "Oh, I can, like, take a breath and relax," and then we go, "What's wrong with you?" Like, we tend to think of them as not performing anymore and disengaged or whatever. No, maybe they're just burned out at achieving at such a high level all the time or having to pick up the slack of other people all the time. And I come at this from a very neurodivergent angle where, for somebody like me, and I'm ASD and ADHD, like I can do a lot of work in a very short period of time. But if I sustain that over a couple of years, like I am done, I am toast. Like you're not going to be able to keep me in vet med for very long. And so we've got to look at our people and is the workload that we are expecting them to achieve day in and day out actually sustainable? I see practices all the time where we are building practices on the most efficient day or the best day, but are we designing practices at the worst day? Because a lot of our practices are living their worst day, day in and day out. They are short staffed. They are, drowning in appointments, or they are, you know, failing to their own systems with lunch breaks or whatnot. And we're designing the practice on the most efficient, best day possible when we have the best, most amount of team present, when we have everything at its highest capability, but that's not sustainable. But if we keep operating those systems.
yeah, and I think a lot of us probably as individuals maybe set our expectations of ourselves based on that
Yeah,
best day, those best circumstances. Like if I push myself as hard as I possibly can, I can see this number of patients, I can produce this amount
yeah,
of revenue, I can accomplish whatever XYZ goals I have.
yeah,
And
it's the
then
I should be able to do this. I can do it on a good day. I should be able to do this all the time. It's no, that's those are the best case scenarios. So can we set capacity in our practices based on the worst day so that when we are having a great day, we can achieve more?
yeah, yeah. No, that's such good advice. And I think I mean there's so much unpredictability in vet med. But it's like you said, it's not uncommon to have multiple worse days in a row, particularly when we've got the system set up where we're short-staffed and we don't have all the resources that we need. So, I like that advice. And Was the sort of the impetus to write the article now, and I'm assuming it's based on feedback that you're getting in real time from people you're working with, or
Yeah, I think it's a culmination of things. It's reflecting back on when I was managing practices and kind of seeing it in a different light. I think it's, I still like to practice as a veterinary assistant in practice 1 to 2 times a month. And so seeing it firsthand, seeing the way that I dealt with it in the past as a manager and business owner, talking to my clients who are going through burnout or going through like identity erosion and crises. I it seems to be all around me that it's like the elephant in the room that nobody's addressed. We talk about the individual person, how to build resilience and how to build engagement and motivation, and it's all on the responsibility of the person rather on the responsibility of the system at hand.
yeah, I really feel that, and I feel like that relates to just other parts of vet med too, where, we talk about the likelihood of making errors and, sort of
Mm,
maybe blaming the individual person for making the error versus the system that was maybe set up to make the error so much
yes.
more likely to happen.
Yeah.
And the system doesn't necessarily mean that there's one person or, like you said, anyone who's intentionally doing it, but
Right.
maybe still warrants a call to action to kind of come back and review everything and see what changes can be made.
Yeah, it's that ever, uh, dilemma of the intention versus impact. I don't think that med intentionally tries to burn its people out. I don't think we intentionally try to ostracize or marginalize the people in the practice, but that is the impact that is happening, and I think it's quietly happening.
Yeah, I agree because we're not talking about it so much, although maybe we are a little bit more now than a few decades ago. Um, and you like you've got so many great articles out now. I love that you're sort of putting it out there for others to be able to feel more comfortable, perhaps commenting on sharing their stories. So some of the other ones that I've seen recently talk about the invisible cost of being easy to work with. Um, I feel like that's something that's instilled in a lot of us as children, even in school, before we even get out into the workforce. Just kind of be compliant, go along with things, don't question, don't be, quote unquote, difficult. Um, how does that play out in the workplace?
So that's actually a really personal article that I wrote. I was in a very, vulnerable time because I was working in practice, and I got some feedback, that I was always difficult or I was always being negative, and I'm just sitting there thinking, like, intention versus impact. My intention was always to help this practice, so always, like, help it improve, help it progress further on what I could see. I was like, "I've owned a practice, like, I understand some of the some of the contexts in which to help this practice. And what I found was the impact I was creating on the team was that I was being difficult or always negative because I could always see the flaws in the system. And so that's not the impact I wanted to have. But as a neurodivergent individual, it's hard for me to not notice a flaw in the system or where it could break down or the potential for it to break down in the future or a scenario in which it could break down for me not to point it out because I wanna help. Like, that's
Yeah,
the whole
because you
reason I point
care.
it out. Yeah, because I care, and I
Right.
deeply care about veterinary medicine. I deeply care for patient care, and I absolutely love the client interactions and the education with the client. Like, I'm probably one of the few who actually like to go into the room with the client. Like, someone else could take care of the pet. Like, let me talk with the client and
Yeah.
let me really care for them. And I just love that part, but it's unfortunately, when you see the problems and you call them out, you're labeled as difficult or you're labeled as toxic. And that's, something we can get into a little bit later. But that's where I came from. It's like the intention. How do I, as a person who sees all the flaws, and sees the quote unquote negativity and want to help and not necessarily point it out. Like it's almost this dichotomous part of me where it's like if I call it out, I'm being called negative and I wish it was just seen from a different angle or at least understood from a different angle.
Yeah, because the problem is not you calling it out.
Yeah.
It's the environment that is not friendly to that. I mean, I can remember growing up and having almost the opposite experience where I was very hesitant to speak up, very shy, very quiet, and I would
Wow.
sometimes get feedback of, "Oh, you should never change." You should stay exactly the
Mm,
way that you were. Whereas inside,
yeah.
I was thinking, I want to speak up, but I don't feel safe and I wish that I could.
Yeah.
And then I'm getting this feedback that this is a desirable quality that you have,
Yes.
and we want you to stay the way that you are.
Yeah, and see,
Um,
that's the unintentional system of praising things that are harmful, right? That's harmful to you as a person. You are erasing who you are. It's a slow erosion where then you just become this robot to the system and not a person in practice.
I have had that exact thought to myself so many times over the years of saying to myself, "I'm not a robot. Why do they want me
Yeah.
to be a robot? Why do they want me to be a robot?" So, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's it's very validating hearing you say that because I can't imagine how
Yeah.
many others have probably had that thought as
And
well.
that's the exact reason I call it a sustainability problem. It's a system sustainability problem and not a burnout like it's not a personal problem for people in vet med
Right.
and
Right.
probably beyond professions.
Yeah, I'm sure it exists in other professions as well, but there are a lot of people who wanna be here, who are trying to stay
Yeah.
here, who may be sort of fighting against everything in them to not
Yeah.
leave. Um, and then you talk about, in the people in the clinic are not your friends.
Mm.
Um, w can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think this was reflecting on, leaders that I talk to, uh, as my clients in my coaching, talking about myself. It's like when you become a leader, you can't talk to your team the same way you talk to them when you were just their side by side. I hate to say hierarch. I can never say that word right.
Hierarchical, I think.
Yes. When you are
Yeah.
side by side and you are their quote unquote equal, you can
Yeah.
talk to them in a way, and vent and talk about frustrations of the job and whatnot. But the moment you become their leader, even if it's not noticeable to the person right away, like you're eroding their trust. Because if you talk like that to them, what makes you think they're not talking about that to someone else about them? Right. So when you become a leader in practice, like you don't have friendships below you, so to speak. And I think it's a really important lesson that I learned as becoming a leader because you want to be friendly and you want to everybody to excel and you want everybody to thrive, that you think everybody's your friend. And I saw it play out in practice and I felt awful watching this leader and this person was a very new leader within the last couple of years, and they learned a really hard lesson where it was trusting somebody with information. And then the moment they no longer felt safe in that quote unquote friendship, the power dynamic showed and that person got the leader in trouble because they said things that the leader was telling them to the rest of the team. Right. So that dynamic is never, it's just never a friendship. And I hate to say that, but it's true. And that's why leaders, I think, often feel so alone when you're a manager or a shift lead or a practice owner or medical director. Like you feel alone, but you've got to find a sense of community outside of the practice.
Yeah, yeah, I like that, and I know we've all heard, like, the analogy of, like, the team being a family. It's not really the healthiest analogy either. Um, and from very brief experience in management, I can identify with that lonely feeling. So, like, how do leaders find community and support outside of the practice? Is it through sort of outside organizations, or how
Yeah,
can you best
I
accomplish that?
I mean, the age old answer is networking, but I feel like before you even take that approach, I feel like you've got to find who you are first. I really believe that most of us have done some sort of core value work in practices and talk about the business's core values and what the practice believes in, and so that we're all in the same uh, in lockstep with how we move forward and treat each other. But what I find is most people have not done a core value exercise for themselves. Find out what it is you value, what it is you align with, and that makes finding the people to network with a lot better. Because what I've seen is people go out there and network, and then they're like, "Oh, I don't agree with some of these people," and then they just feel like, "Oh, I can't network because the whole world doesn't agree with who I am," and then they lock down and they again, that's kind of an identity erosion because they're like, "Oh, I'm
You're
an
like,
outlier. I'm
"I
different."
tried it, it didn't work
Yeah.
for
Where
me."
it's like if you find what your values are and align those to the people that you're trying to network with, you'll
Yeah.
find community. But I
Yeah.
think that's step number one is your own core value exercise. What do you value? What do you believe in? And then once you know that, you can then figure out where and how to network.
And that's going to have huge ramifications just as you're in your prowess as a leader,
Yeah,
um, how
absolutely.
you treat your team once you know what
Yeah,
your values are, what you stand for, what's important, and that can imagine transfer to how you advocate for your team and how you
100%.
stand
Because
up.
you're not just using the clinic values are there as a foundation, but then your own values. Like, are you unintentionally not living up to your own personal values as a leader because that's how you think leadership should look like, and it's within the bounds of the practice values. I still have personal values that I live up to each and every day that shape me as a leader, and I think it's important to that everyone, not just leaders, but everyone kind of align with what their values are. It helps us find what practices we belong in, what networks we belong in. I think it's so powerful to have.
Yeah, and are there I would imagine just kind of like, can people kind of look up online different value exercises, or are there ones that you recommend?
Uh, Oftentimes when I one-to-one coaching with my clients, we do a values exercise almost, if not immediate, fairly into our first time seeing each other because I think it's really powerful and eye-opening. But yeah, there's absolutely values exercise. You can alter the ones you probably did for your own veterinary practice, or if you've seen
Mhm.
one done at your practice, you can certainly
Mhm.
kind of adopt that same style. Look at the words. You can Google search a million and one core value words.
Like,
The the big thing is define it for what it means to you. It's got to be personal to you.
yeah, yeah, no, that makes sense. Um, and I love your focus on making, you talk about kind of finding out what your personal core values are and how that affects your leadership, and but then also really focusing on making the workplace safe for everybody,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
particularly for neurodivergent team members. Um,
Yes.
and I'd love to kind of hear like what that means to you, like for a workplace to be safe.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I work a lot in the space of conflict management is because, in my experience, neurodivergence shows up in behaviors that are unwanted in the practice. And then we throw out the words like difficult or they're toxic. And I think that um, I start to look at behaviors that are unwanted. And we can talk about that from the neurodivergent perspective, but I feel like there's an unmet need. Right, and so we can look at someone who's displaying a behavior that we don't agree with, that's not aligned with the practice, that is whatever it may look like, that's not, uh, that is a wanted behavior, then we can say, "This person has an unmet need, and how can I help as the leader of that practice, how can I help them find their need?" Or that might be finding their need within the practice, or it might be helping them find their need or discovering what their need is outside of the practice.
Yeah, and I feel like that was when we were sort of chatting initially, that idea came up a lot when we were talking about the idea of toxicity,
Yeah.
which I mentioned, initially. And you were gracious to kind of offer your perspective on that, which I really
Yeah.
appreciate. Just talking about like we hear about it in a lot of different scenarios, like a
Mhm.
toxic workplace or toxic individuals. Um, and I feel like it's just like a common label
Yeah.
to apply. Um, and you have a take on it that it's, I don't know if you ever use the word or if you feel like there's always a better way to describe it, but I feel like that was where you were sort of explaining to me that a lot of times there's an unmet need there.
Yeah. I think once we label someone, whatever terminology we use, and I
Yeah.
think toxic is a very easy go-to one right now because that's kind of that wording has kind of developed and taken a life of its own. It's once you've labeled someone toxic or difficult or whatever, it kind of shuts down the conversation of like, if I tell you, oh, so and so is toxic, you're like, oh, get rid of them, right? There's no question in your mind, get rid of them. It
But
becomes
then
a
it makes them
way.
like the enemy. Kind of
Exactly.
like polarizes us,
Yeah.
us against
And
them.
then there's no reason to get curious about like, well, what's actually going on? What
Yeah.
is the behaviors being displayed? What like there's no real conversation after that. Once you put somebody in that label, like at least for me, my mind goes, okay, I no longer get curious about what's happening. And so I can't if you label someone, at least for me, then it becomes, well, I don't look at them as having an unmet need. I label if the label is toxic, then my thought is you cut it out, right? You cut the cancer out, you get rid of
Right.
toxicity.
Right.
Like that's how you deal with it. And if we can come at it from this responsibility of the leader to go, this person is displaying a behavior that I don't agree with, that's not aligned with the values of the practice or not aligned with whatever it may be, they must have something going on that's not met. They must have a need that's not met. And so, like, I think about the person who undermines you all the time, right? I call it the underminer personality. I like to think of that as maybe they're insecure collaborator, right? Maybe they need safety and recognition, and you can offer them clarity, affirm contributions, and hold boundaries without hostility. And if you can fulfill that need, I think they become a productive part of the team again, right? If you have the gossip person, in my mind, they might need to belong and feel included into the practice, which is why, like, they're looking and seeking for connection, which is why they're gossiping. And so if we can approach that and redirect their storytelling towards transparency and shared understanding, then we're creating a story that unites the team rather than silos them out. So I look at people and I think, what is their unmet need, and how, as their leader, can I help fulfill or redirect that need to something more productive and positive within the practice?
And do you find that when you approach things from that mindset and you sort of approach the individual and try to, because maybe you look at that and you don't know what their unmet need is, and
Yeah.
a lot of times you imagine you have to ask them, you have to have a conversation with them. Do you
Yeah.
find
And
that
this
when
is.
you no, please tell me.
Yeah, I think this is the hard work as leaders. Like we have a ton on our plates. We're running the practice, we're running the business. Maybe we're running, maybe if we're the medical director, we still have appointments. We're responsible for the medical protocols and all of the things. But this is where the rubber meets the road of your people, and taking a people first approach is like, what is going on with the person I'm leading? Like that is to me that comes above and beyond, like except for patient safety, like that it goes above and beyond all the rest of my duties. If my people are okay, they take care of the business, they take care of the pets, they take care of the clients. Everything else will follow, but the underlying thing, 99% of the time, are the people. And if I can affect the people, I affect everything else down the line. And so it takes time and effort and work to lead your people in a way that unites them back to the team. Because it didn't happen overnight that they became a gossip. It happened slowly over time. It didn't happen overnight that they, are trying to undermine the leader of the practice. It happened slowly over time. And it's going to take correction to slowly, again, over time, redirect into a positive mindset.
Yeah, and do you find that, like, if you are able to approach that individual with, like, a lot of curiosity, that generally, I mean, I don't know if we can even generalize here, but can sort of open a door for them to be vulnerable and have a conversation and really kind of let a leader in, as to what they need? I mean, I would imagine it's different for every individual, but is that sort of what you refer to when you hear about, okay, it takes time, uh,
Yeah.
to kind of have those conversations?
Yes, I think that I have a four-step model in my neuro-inclusive leadership model, and that goes for what we're talking about here in toxicity is reflect on the system, reflect on what has been happening, right? So if we have eroded this person over time, it's going to take time, consistency, and effort to get it back to where we want it. So we need to reflect on that. We need to implement something. They need to see that we're not just saying it; we're actually living it, right? And then be consistency. Do we have sustainability in that implementation? Or is it like we say it, we're going to do it for 3 months, and then our behavior drops off as leaders, right? Because our team does that. We're human, we're flawed, it can happen. And sometimes we'll want to fix a problem, and then it becomes easier, and it's like, oh, I don't need to do this anymore. And you let it go. And then you get this boomerang effect of quote unquote toxicity back into your practice. So we need to reflect on the systems, we need to implement, we need to have sustainability, and then back to empowering the team, empowering them to speak up, empowering them. If we have created safety, we should be able to have enough trust to empower the team to speak up when things are not going well right from the start, rather than having that slow erosion over time.
Yeah, and it is so complicated because, in those situations, you as the manager, you've got to think about, you know, the entire team. You've got to think about the individual and sort of
Hmm.
establishing trust with that individual and finding out what their needs are. And then if some kind of hurt has already been caused that affects other team members, think about
Yeah.
protecting them and, potentially repairing whatever rift or other damage has been done.
Yeah.
Um, so I could see how it's a very, very complicated dance. Um,
Yeah. I talk about there's like six uh, cognitive biases that happen as leaders when we label someone toxic, right? So it's kind of a slow buildup, but there are six biases. First is the actor observer bias, and that kind of is like the impact intention that I talked about earlier. Is you attribute their behavior, that unwanted behavior, to their personality. Whereas when I have a behavior that the team doesn't like, I attribute that to the circumstances. Like, oh, I raised my voice because I was having a stressful day and I just wasn't in the right mindset, and I'm really sorry, right? But if when we start to label someone toxic, toxicity becomes their personality, not the circumstances around it. Well, maybe they were having a crap day. Maybe they are going through a lot this month,
yeah.
this year, whatever. Right. So it's called actor observer bias. The next one is fundamental attribution error, where we overestimate their personality factors and underestimate the situational factors. Again, it's kind of that same thing with the actor observer. We give much more weight to the personality. They're toxic. They're intentionally trying to do this rather than the circumstances that have created the behavior in the first place. Confirmation bias kicks in because once we've seen it once, we just assume they're going to do it again. And we're going to see every time something small happens, we're going to see that as an attribution to the quote unquote toxic behavior that they're displaying. Negativity bias, because we're always, kind of looking out for negative interactions. We're much more on the alert for negative interactions, especially if we want to protect our team. We get that kind of mentality. I want to protect my team. So negativity bias is something that will happen and point out in our brains a lot faster than the positive that they're probably also contributing to the team. And then we have in-group bias, so that's the fifth one, and it's an unconscious favor to those who communicate or look or have some sort of similarity in style or values or pace as you as a leader or as the group. So if somebody is not displaying one of the core values of the practice, right, and it's the only one, then we will see them and kind of as a negative instead of going, "Hey, what's going on?" Right? So it's a call out. And then there's the halo horns effect, which is the sixth bias, and that's kind of a strong impression that colors your view of their actions, right, whether it be positive or negative. So those are kind of the six, in my mind, those are the six biases that get activated when we call someone toxic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot. And when you're in it, I can imagine it's really hard to like know,
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm displaying all these biases.
Yeah.
Are there exercises or things that you sometimes will have people try to either go through or you lead them through on their own to help them sort of check themselves and see if maybe they're experiencing one or more of these biases?
I think number one is awareness that it can even happen. I'm not
Yeah.
sure how many leaders are aware of all the cognitive bias. I mean, there's over 200 and some odd cognitive biases out there. So having awareness as a leader to what cognitive biases are out there, number one, that could exist. And I think just bringing awareness to the ones that can be activated during that time can help unite our team. It is something I bring my coaching clients through and start to pick apart. I don't necessarily name it, but I do challenge your thought process on like, what about this? And have you thought about that? Like, just ask questions in a way for them to look at it in a different light, in a different way. And so that's what I love about coaching leaders is to really change their mindset if they are labeling someone as toxic. Well, let's dig into that. Let's find out like what happened the first time, what happened the second time. Do you feel stronger about the second time because it happened the first time? And if you were able to meet their needs at the first time, would you feel that strongly about the second time? So and it's one of the reasons I really like my neuro-inclusive leadership model, I call it RISE model, because it
Mhm.
allows you to reflect and then implement. And if it's not working, then let's reflect and implement again. And it's not a linear model. It's like we can get trapped in the middle and then start back at the beginning. Okay, let me reflect back on it. Let's re-implement. Is this sustainable in the long term? And now let's empower the team.
And does neuro-inclusive, I just wanna make sure I understand that term. Does that have to deal with being inclusive of neurodivergent and neurotypical and sort of all, different types of individuals who may be present
Yeah,
in the workplace that you're managing?
yeah. Neuro-inclusive for me just means that you are inclusive in the way that people's brains process information, right? So somebody who is experiencing a bias, right? Like they may not be thinking about the inclusive way that other people are processing the information. So, for neurodivergent individuals specifically, there could be emotional dysregulation, executive dysfunctioning that can happen. And we need to be able to honor that and see it for what it is rather than for seeing it as quote unquote a toxic behavior.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, and then one of the points that we had talked about sort of originally, this idea that, like, the people are not okay.
Hmm.
Um, and we talked about kind of promoting this culture of sort of like suffering and just kind of like getting through it.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, are you seeing are you seeing changes? Are you seeing that maybe that's less less of the norm these days, that that's less common as particularly as time goes by and we're seeing like newer generations come into practice and more of these ideas are being spoken about more openly? Are you seeing that reflected in some of the work that you do?
I I think that in my opinion, we're at the early stages of awareness for this. Um, I will say I don't even think I realized how bad it was until I started working in coaching and have, over 60 clients that I've worked with that are all dealing with a very similar core issue is loss of identity. And we talk about loss of identity in veterinary medicine in general, where we make our whole identity veterinary medicine, right? And there's like we don't do if we go out and we have a hobby, we do it with people from veterinary medicine, right? Or, you know, our whole identity is wrapped up in veterinary medicine. So there's a slow erosion of our own identity that happens working in veterinary medicine because we throw ourselves in it 100%. But then there's this also specifically for neurodivergent individuals like me, where we have been I think the statistics are 20 to 100 times more negative feedback in our lifetime than the neurotypical person. So the person who does not have ADHD or dyslexia, ASD, dyspraxia, something like that. So we have about 20 to 100 times more negative feedback. And so what that does is that we are constantly trying to perform what is acceptable in the rooms that we walk in. And so the story I tell is that when I first met my husband, who's now my husband, he used to make fun of me in a joking way, like, nice way, where he'd be like, "Hey, you are a completely different person with this friend group than with this friend group than when you're at work versus when you're at me." And I didn't know it at the time, but that's that mask or that performance that happens. Whereas in this space, I don't feel 100% safe to be myself. So I'm going to act a certain way that I'm expected to act. Right. And in vet med, we do that, right? We praise people for not speaking up like they did to you. Like that's not who you are. Right. And so the system praises people for overperforming. The system pushes people out who are quote unquote not motivated or disengaged rather than seeing them for who they are and what they are. And so I see this slow erosion over time, not only for neurodivergence, but also in veterinary medicine. And there's that Venn diagram overlap where they've lost their identity. And I remember this one client so vividly where I asked them, like, what's your favorite color? And this person said to me, is like, I know I'm supposed to say pink. And this person was a female. I know I'm supposed to say pink because I'm a girl, but I actually don't know. I just tell people pink because that's what they expect me to say. And so that to me was like a pivotal moment to realize that the identity erosion is such a thing that we're not talking about in vet med. And that's the system that's inadvertently pushing people down and pushing people out of veterinary medicine.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I I I don't think I have even the slightest bit of understanding of what it's like to live life that way, and I think that's probably true of most people who have no personal experience with neurodivergence. I'm seeing little bits of it. I have a elementary school age child with ADHD, and I'm seeing just little bits of it in terms of the way he's treated by teachers. Um, and it really breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart, and it makes me fearful. It makes me worry about, what his life will be like as he continues to grow and what kind of obstacles he will face. Um,
Well, the concern I have, and I think this is the environment that we're in right now, is that w- the diagnosis rate for women are much lower because they're often, if they are even brought to a psychiatrist early in age, they're often diagnosed with an anxiety or depressive disorder instead of ADHD or autism because they don't fit the medical mold. And that standard is based off of a young male who is a bit more hyperactive or a bit more outwardly displaying. And so veterinary medicine is female dominated. And so the most likely time for women to get or females to be diagnosed with a proper diagnosis is after they've had a child and they see that their child is struggling and they're like, but I'm also struggling with the same thing. It may not look the same, but I'm struggling with the same thing. And in that case, they go and seek diagnosis. Or at perimenopause, when all of their scaffolding and support structures and coping mechanisms they put in place for themselves for their lifetime to be a quote unquote high functioning individual during perimenopause, a lot of that collapses. And what worked for them in the past no longer works for them now. And then they seek help. And if they're not diagnosed again with a depressive or anxiety disorder, they're properly diagnosed with an ASD or ADHD diagnosis, or maybe dyslexia or something to that nature. And so those are the 2 times they're most likely to be diagnosed. I think we're getting better as a society, but it's still not great. And when I think about veterinary medicine being female dominated, I truly think that there is so many more veterinary professionals, specifically more female, that are not diagnosed and don't understand the struggles that they are naturally going through and then trying to overfunction. Not only do you have marginalization of just being female in the world that we live in right now, but then you have marginalization of yourself because you and others because you're trying to fit into a world that wasn't necessarily designed with your brain in mind.
wow. Yeah, that gives me a lot to think about personally, but also I really appreciate you sharing that because I know that's gonna hit home with a lot of people who are listening. As you said, with so many, such a strong female presence in our profession in general, and just the mindset that either we come into veterinary medicine with or we learn in veterinary medicine, which is just kind of power through, like you said, overfunction, this whole idea that we're um, just kind of suffer through, and then the neurodivergent, at times, tendency to sort of perform to fit in, to not be ostracized in the space that you're in. Um, and then we wonder why people are suffering, or at
Yeah.
least why some people are suffering.
And don't get me wrong, I love and appreciate the fact that we are talking about mental health more so in our profession than we ever have in the past. And I love
Right.
it. But I think that there's more nuance that we still have to discover. And I think neurodivergence is definitely a big piece of that puzzle.
Definitely. Um, and then in terms of just kind of sticking with that neurodivergence in the workplace, you've been very open about your neurodivergence, and
Yeah.
then you're also writing a book on the topic.
Yes.
Can you
So
talk
that was
about
kind of
that?
the rise model I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I wanted to create basically, let me go back. I got my diagnosis of ADHD in my early 20s. And then I was like, okay, great. This explains a lot. And it really gave me insight into self discovery, which was great. I didn't really do anything with it. I kept trying to control myself and put myself back into that. How can I fit into the world now that I know who I am? Right. Which is for me the wrong way to look at it, looking backwards and hindsight being 2020. Then during the pandemic in 2020, mental health struggle, just like a lot of other people, went back to my psychiatrist. I told him I was struggling. And I'll never forget that pivotal moment where he said, "Do you really want to know the truth? And if you know me, I'm a let's throw the kitchen sink at the problem type of person. Like I want to hit it and hit it hard right from the beginning. And then that way I feel like I've done everything I can." And so he said, I can't diagnose you. I don't feel comfortable, but I have strong reason to believe that you are probably autistic. And it was like, I went home thinking, this guy's a quack. I'm going to prove him wrong. I hit the books. I learned everything that I thought I could learn at the time on it. And it just like opened my world, knowing like, oh my gosh, this makes a lot of sense. Discovered, I felt like I discovered the second half of who I was, which was crazy. It's eye opening to be 30 in my late 30s and feel like I'm just now discovering myself for the first time. And so that just led me into, well, if I am struggling with this and I didn't even know I had a diagnosis, then I'm sure there's other people. I had a hard time coming out, so to speak, to my parents and be like, "Hey, I got this diagnosis." So it took me 2 years to go to my father and be like, "Hey, I got this diagnosis a while ago, about 2 years ago. Um, I just wanted you to know." And he says, "You got that when you were 3, but we also thought the doctor was a quack, so we stopped going to see that doctor." And it just made me realize, like, the struggles in the workplace and in life that I didn't even know I necessarily could pinpoint until after I read up about it, people don't have to go through. And that's became the journey of my advocacy in the neurodivergent space. Like, I wanted to scream it from the high heavens, like, there are people out there who have no idea that they're struggling every day, and this is why they're struggling. So to bring that back around, I wrote a book on neuroinclusive leadership. It's called Rewriting the Rules, a leadership model for neuroinclusive human-centered workplace. And that is going to hit the shelves, believe early April 2026. We're trying to get it out a little bit faster. But that's coming out early next year. And then, I'm writing my second book, and it's called The Toilet Paper Principle, which is about universal design and how we can build our practices. Because my thought process is when you sit down to use the toilet paper should be within arm's reach. So if we extrapolate that analogy into veterinary medicine or the workplace, when we get into the workplace, everything that we need physically, cognitively, emotionally should be within arm's reach. That doesn't mean the practice has to supply mental health, but they have to have avenues to help people find like I just have to have it within arm's reach. The accessibility of where I can turn to is either that's an EAP or, my health insurance or whatever that may be. And I'm telling you, when we think about universal design and that principle, it really does actually benefit everyone in the practice, not just those who are neurodivergent. So if we think about like curb cuts, like that was meant to benefit people in a wheelchair. Universal design is the same thing, whereas we do a curb cut, but it also benefits the child in the stroller. It also benefits those who aren't in wheelchairs, right? It benefits shopping carts going up and down the sidewalks. It benefits the entire population somehow. When we think about universal design in practice, we can actually increase efficiency. We can see our people. We can have sustainable practices, sustainable systems, and keep our people longer in practice. And that's kind of my advocacy right now is on universal design because accommodations, while wonderful, are employee led. So I have to ask for accommodations, which cause a lot of shame and blame. And I have had many of my clients say after I disclosed my diagnosis, I was terminated from my job, despite how illegal that can be. They don't want to fight it because that is a lot of shame that comes with that. So if we can create a world of accessibility and universal design, it's employer led. So it says, let me give you accessibility before you need to ask me for accommodation. And we keep our people from emotionally burning out, not just because of veterinary medicine, but because of the systems that have been created. So if we can reflect on the systems, implement universal design, we'll have sustainability and empowerment of our people.
I love that so much. I love that whole concept, and I have to say I love the name, the toilet The toilet paper principle. I love that so much. That's so creative. Um, and when is that book coming out, or you're still writing it?
I'm in the middle of writing it now.
Okay.
It'll probably be another I'm hoping for early 2027 because it took me about a year and a half to write my first book, and I'm already kind of a couple chapters in. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that is coming out in 2027. However, I am talking about the toilet paper principle and universal design at veterinary conferences. I'm going to be at Michigan Veterinary Conference next month, this time, about end of September. I'm going to be speaking at Can West Veterinary Conference in Banff, Canada, in late October, and then hopefully again soon next year in other conferences.
Very exciting.
Thanks.
Um, and other than your books and your speaking, what's something else you're excited about in vet med? Either that's happening now or that's happening in the or that you're looking forward to happening in the future.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm seeing, and this is working at Uncharted Vet Conference, is I'm seeing a rise of other companies or communities really developing leadership because I think it's something that we have not done well in the past. Like to me, and a lot of practice managers that I have talked to and practice owners that like they just fell into leadership. They looked to because they were good at their jobs and now they own a practice or now they manage a practice or now they manage, other medical clinicians and they have no idea how to lead. They know how to manage. They don't know how to lead. And I'm really excited to see kind of how the leadership evolution happens in veterinary medicine because it's something that's needed. We don't have training on it. A lot of practices don't have time for training on it. And I'm really happy to see a lot of resources starting to really pop up. And I'm talking good resources, not things that are damaging to leadership.
Yeah, with everything that you've talked about today, that's going to be so critical. And like you said, improving sustainability and
Mm,
keeping more of the people we need to stay in vet med.
yes.
Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed this time. I feel like we could have talked for much. I mean, I could have like picked your brain for so much longer on all of these amazing concepts. But I really appreciate you being here to share them with us. And is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners, or let them know how they can find you if they want to?
Yeah, the big thing is if this is something you're struggling with and this kind of material resonates with you, you can find me at my website, which is coaching.syn-apt.me, and that's syn-apt.me. And then that's where you can find a lot more information. I've got some free resources on my website on needs assessments, on self coaching. And then you can get one-on-one coaching with me because I really feel like we need to bring people back to who they are so they can stay and in veterinary medicine, which is a profession they love.
I love that message. Thank you so much for sharing all that with us. Good luck to you
Yeah.
and everything you're
Yeah.
doing. And thanks for being here with us.
Thanks so much again for having me.